She has a couple of inspections. How about I'll try this one. Can you guys hear me on this one? Okay. Okay. Um, so June Barnes has two rental inspectors that work our long-term rental inspection, and one inspector that works our short-term rental inspection. Before we get started on the presentation, we did change it up from if you've been here to if you've been to previous presentations. It's a much shorter presentation. It's about a fourth of the amount of slides. We did condense it down. We just felt it was getting too long, too kind of drawn out. It wasn't leaving enough time for people to be able to ask questions and talk, and that was kind of just not working as well for everybody. If you can't see these slides for some reason, it's not working for you from where you're sitting. Of course, it says there is some room where you can move up if you'd like, but also on the table over here, I printed out some copies of the slideshow, so you can always get one of those if you'd like, so that you can follow along a little easier from your seat. Um, but we'll go ahead and get started. And oh, I think the loop was going, wasn't it? Okay, so obviously I just talked about us. So what we're going to talk about tonight is we're going to talk about um, the different aspects of our team and the work product that they did during the quarter. So we're going to talk about first our support team, and then we're going to talk about our rental team. We're going to talk about our general code enforcement team, and then we're just going to summarize it all up together, and then we'll just close it out, and we'll be done with the evening. And at the end of each one of those, well, not at the end of each of those sections. At the end, we'll answer any questions, and we can. I mean, I'll stay as long as needed to answer any questions and help out with anything that we need to take care of. So I threw this slide in here because I just wanted to have a conversation kind of with the group here, if people are willing to have a conversation. And I just wanted to ask you guys in the audience, like, how many code violations do you think you see in this picture, and or what code violations do you think you see in this picture? Anybody want to take a stab at it? Not any of the inspectors that are sitting in the audience. That'd be yes, yes, ma'am, in the back. Okay, the fence. She says the fence. I would agree with her. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, the vegetation growing on the building and up on the roof. Yeah, I would agree with that. Yes, sir. Okay. Okay. So, anything else? Anybody wants to call out? Yes, ma'am, Linda. Gotcha. Dead branches on the roof. Okay. Debris in the yard. Debris. Okay. All right, tall grass. So we call out about a lot of things, right? They're kind of common sense things, right? We all know things that like don't look aesthetically pleasing to us, right? So my next question for you is, what violations are those? Like what international property maintenance codes do we write up? What land development codes do we write up? Right. So there's like and kind of the point of this slide is that we deal with a lot of trying to communicate with people in the community about violations that frustrate them. And man, this thing's like auto going forward on me. I think that might be that timing on those first four slides. It might be something that I did. Sorry, Joe. I'm messing you up. Um, but the reality is that often, especially when you're dealing with if you take this property for example, there's a lot going on in this picture. And although we probably called out about 5 things, Mark, how many things do you think you see in this picture? In addition to those things you saw, there is window damage, there is door damage, there is improper storage of a trash container, there's an unlicensed vehicle. Well, we know it's unlicensed because we dealt with it. We're cheating on that one, I think. Uh, your vegetation is overgrown, which somebody referenced the yard, but it goes further into the landscape as well. And those are all things that the inspector, when they take these photos, it's just not as simple as showing up at the property. they take a photo, they go back, and then they print out a letter. They have to go back, they have to go through the International Property Maintenance Codes, they have to find the right sections of the International Property Maintenance Code and or the Land Development Code, and sometimes both, and they have to find those sections that match up with the violations that they observed. And they have to make sure that their pictures articulate and their testimony that they would be able to give in hearing articulate what the violation is said in the International Property Maintenance Code and in the Land Development Code before they go ahead and issue that notice of violation. Because if they don't have, if their idea of what they don't like when they observe out there is not supported by the International Property Maintenance Code or the Land Development Code, then it's not a violation that they can address. And that's sometimes the most difficult part, both for them and both for the community. Because sometimes there's things that we don't like in the community that aren't necessarily a violation, but also there's things that are violations that, for the inspectors, they're very difficult to find in the code. And it takes a little while for them to do the research and adequately find them because they might be things that we don't deal with on a daily basis. There's some things that they deal with all the time. For instance, overgrown landscape, grass, things like that. These guys are well versed in that. It's just like the first thing they learn when they come to work here. And then they use it probably every week of their career, pretty much. So moving forward here. Any question? I will say any questions on that slide before we move on. Any comments anybody want to add? Okay. It's a good slide? I appreciate that. Thank you. I like the conversation on it too. Thank you guys for participating. It only works if everybody participates. All right, so, I threw our vision up here, and I'll just read it out. I got to cheat. I got to turn around and look at it because it's a little long. So the Neighborhood Services Department is principally focused on improving neighborhoods and positively impacting the quality of life of our residents and visitors. We work to determine the root causes of problems and their impact on our community. We will implement solutions designed specifically to address community concerns, work with community partners whenever possible, and hold responsible parties accountable when necessary. We will conduct ongoing assessments to evaluate the outcomes and their effectiveness. And we put two pictures in here, and I don't know how well you guys can see it from the slideshow, but this is Dr. Duva's place at International Speedway in Peninsula, and you can see the before picture up here. I put this in here because he just opened it back here at the beginning of March, and for us, this is probably one of our proudest, before and afters that kind of came to its completed state here most recently. You could see that in its condition when we really started working on this several years back, it was in very poor condition, and it sat in very poor condition for a very long time. And you can see what it looks like now. It's a running business, and hopefully it'll be a thriving business in the years to come. And we're excited we're excited at where it's at, and we're excited at what it'll continue to be. I was really worried we were going to start back over at the beginning on that one, so I'm glad we didn't. So next, we're going to talk about our support team. Our support team is right now just comprised of 3 people. We have on this side you'll see Teresa. Teresa is our front desk clerk. If you've ever come in to report something to us at the front desk, or if you've called in on the code line, this is probably who you've spoken to. In the middle, Brenda. She's our newest hire. She just started with us recently, and she's our board coordinator. And Kim, who was our board coordinator, she's transitioning into the role of office coordinator. And they're comprised of our support team, and they work in the background to really support the function of everything else that the rest of our team does. If we didn't have them, the rest of this wouldn't work because we'd really have no teeth in what we do, because we wouldn't be able to get things to court, we wouldn't be able to get it in front of the magistrate, we wouldn't be able to get things in front of the code board, and ultimately there wouldn't be a positive outcome, because you all know, and we'll see as we go through, although we get a lot of people to get into compliance through conversation and letters and notices and things like that, not everybody responds to that stuff. So our support team here, one of those papers. So the support team, I took a moment to kind of try to gather up what they do, because I think it's important what they do. There's a lot of work in the background that they do that does not get accounted for a lot of times. And we did some quick estimates. We've been tracking the amount of work coming in and out of the front lobby over like the last month or so, and we use that to kind of backwards estimate what's been going on for the last quarter there. So you can see here that approximately, and these are approximates, that we dealt with about 507 walk-ins, about 1,417 calls, 1,092 lien searches. If you don't know what a lien search is, I'll explain. A lien search is um, that basically, whenever a title company, a property owner can do it too, but usually when anybody's going to sell a property, they'll conduct what they'll submit to the city a lien search to check a property address to see if it has any open liens on the property. And that's basically a public record search that ultimately somebody at the city has to do and verify that either there is a lien or isn't a lien. Whether there's a lien or not, the lien searches get submitted all the time, and they have to continuously be done. So, in addition to those types of requests, we get other requests from other city departments who need assistance on how to deal with things, or they submit things to us that they need assistance from code enforcement. Like police department calls us when they need assistance. Public Works sometimes calls us. Different stuff like that. There was probably about 78 of those or so over the course of that time. Often those are things that just it might be another department calling us, just trying to figure out who is best suited to be able to deal with a problem. A lot of those would be just resolved in conversations, or they're forwarded over to supervisors to deal with. There's a lot of public records that come through us. I would guess, I never asked the clerk's office, but I would guess it's probably the police department and us that get the most public records requests. Mainly because of sales of property, but also because of the code cases and enforcement action. Often, once a lawyer gets involved, the first thing they do is they want to see all the records. But also, once somebody gets to the stage of being enforcement action being taken against them, where they're in court, they often make public records requests, or if they're doing lien reviews, they want to get those records. And then, Teresa, when she's up there, she's responsible for, as you guys are calling in and reporting things, she's putting those cases in and entering cases in. So she probably entered about 403 cases over that first quarter into the system. And again, these are just estimates in these slides. As the year goes on and we're actually tracking that data through the year, this information will get more reliable as the quarters grow. So she also helps right now, because we don't have a rental technician. She helps process rental applications and payments, and we estimated about 143 of those during this time frame. She spends about 409 minutes processing mail in and out of the office. She's the receiver and sender of mail. She spends quite a bit of her time, and you can see the graph is the breakdown of that time. She's a busy lady. She doesn't really get the credit she deserves. She's probably, we're all pretty busy in neighborhood services, but she's nonstop. I think when she gets a break from the desk, she really appreciates just being able to walk away from the lobby. So, if you're ever in there, give her a thank you if you would. Moving on to the next slide here. So the support team also in the background, this would be our board coordinator. So right now, Kim is training Brenda to take over that job. So they're both kind of participating in this, but there's a series of cases that get pushed towards hearing. They don't always all make it to hearing, and we'll talk about the amount of cases later on that go to hearing that the inspectors have to manage when we get to those sections. But just because a case doesn't make it to hearing doesn't mean that there's not a process in the background that occurs. When our support staff receives a notice or a request from an inspector to move a case to hearing, they have to create a case file for that. They have to then make their own notices. They have to enter that data into a different spreadsheet. They have to create documents and conduct their own research to check certain records in order to be able to ensure that we've given the proper notice to the proper owners. And all that is work that has to be done, and it's all work that is being done in the background. So this slide's intended to try to reflect some of that work. And you can see that, there's 3 different boards that we have or three different hearings that occur throughout the month. There's a special magistrate, there's the code enforcement board, and then there's the rental magistrate. And you can see the breakdown. So blue is the special magistrate, orange is code enforcement, and then gray is the rental magistrate. And the total for the month, when you spread it out over the 3 months, total for the 3 months is 269 cases that they prepared for hearing. Now, not all of those went to hearing, and like I said, we'll talk about that a little bit when we go forward. In addition to those 269 cases, when we move on to the next slide here, you'll see that there's another type of case that they prepare for the agendas for those hearings. They're called lien reviews. So lien reviews is a part of the process where when somebody finally gets the issue corrected at their property, they can come in and seek an adjustment of their lien that was imposed against them. Now that they've corrected the issue, they can come in some cases, in most cases, they can come in and ask for that lien to be adjusted down and explain why, number one, they got the lien and why it took them so long to get it corrected, and try to ask that magistrate or the code board to reduce it. And many of those requests don't make it to agenda either. We get called all the time, and we get asked to be set on the agenda. Then people don't show up. They don't fill out the paperwork. But all that stuff, again, usually a case file starts to get created. Not always, but in many cases. So this slide really reflects the ones where case files were started. These things were added to the process as started to go to agenda. Most of these make it to agenda. And there's a total of 30, and it breaks down. You can see in here about 54% of them go to special magistrate, and 33% of them go to code board, and only 13% of them go to rental magistrate. That makes sense since the smallest amount of our cases go to rental magistrate anyways. And most of our cases that go to rental magistrate are irreparable and irreversible cases that they're not really eligible for lien review per se. Moving on. So next, we have our rental enforcement team. So this is our rental enforcement team. You got our 3 inspectors and Miss Barnes. It's Luanda Domingo over there. You got Cliff Reckenzone in the back, and you got Stephen Cole. We just took new photos this week, and we got to throw them in the PowerPoint. So they really came out really nice. So I'm pretty happy about this. So I hope you guys enjoyed them. So yeah, I think they look great. I think the teams look great. Moving on to this next slide. So the rental team, they do work and categorize their work as proactively and complaint driven. They are a little more complaint driven because a lot of their stuff comes in from tenants. We get a lot of stuff. Honestly, stuff comes across their plate because tenants either stop paying and then they're going to get evicted, so now they want to complain on their landlord, or they get frustrated because things aren't getting fixed and they've asked a million times and things aren't getting fixed. So then they finally just pick up the phone and they call us, and that's often how things start. But often, neighbors just identify them as rentals as well and call in and let us know as well. You can see that about 56% of their cases are complaint driven, and 44% of them are field generated. And then you have the breakdown there as well. It's 66 cases itself are complaint driven, while 52 were field generated. This is just for the first quarter, for a total of 118 cases just for the rental program. So under our rental program, Inspector Reckenzone, who's here with us today, give a wave. Right? Inspector Reckenzone was the rental team's go-getter of the quarter with the highest number of field-generated cases. He had 28. He didn't have any good before and after photos, but that's because he works short-term rentals. So short-term rentals either look great before and after, or they look bad before and after. It's kind of either way. So, yeah. So in this case, we used one of the other photos that Inspector Yates had, and this is a. I hope you guys either can see this well from where you're at, or you grab a close-up photo and you can see it. But this is a pretty good before and after. You can see that they did a good job painting this house up. They did use the same paint, but the paint was horribly bad on the one side of the house, and they've They've since cleaned it up, and the house looks much better. It's a great improvement. Great job, Cliff, on those proactive cases. Thank you. So we're moving on here. In the rental team, their cases break down by subtype, and we broke them down by subtype. So of those 118 that they opened, 64% of them were 4 units or less, which makes sense because that's primarily what their responsibility is. The program is intended and designed for them to monitor and license. That's part that we just recently was it a little over a year ago now. Wow. Yeah. It was last January, right? Yeah, where we took the licensing back. Yeah. So just a little over a year now, we've had the licensing side of the rental program as well, and you know, our the what we deal with is that 4 units and less property. If it's 5 units or more, the licensing aspect is dealt with by the state. Now, the code enforcement aspect of those properties can still be dealt with us by code enforcement, uh, for whatever other maintenance issues are going on that property. Um, and if they're not seeking the license, like if they failed to get the business tax receipt that they're required to through the city or through the state, we can address that through some enforcement action, but we don't typically have to deal with those. Those are pretty rare. But that's why you have 64% that is 4 units or less. Have a very small percentage that's 5 units or more, and then you have other accommodations, which is you'll see other accommodations. It says STR, that's short-term rentals. So 32% is short-term rentals, and we pump about as many cases of short-term rentals as we can into our hearings each month. We really can't fit any more into our hearings, otherwise we would be in court 2 or 3 days a month on short-term rentals. Um, and that's a citywide endeavor. We find them. It's surprising. I'm really shocked these days where we find short-term rentals all over the city, from Margaritaville all the way to the south end of the beach side, from the north end of the beach side all the way down to like Bellevue. I think we found one. Yeah. So, um, wide variety. Um, this next one, so also for this quarter, Inspector Domingo, who's not here with us this evening, she's the rental program's case pusher for the quarter. She had the highest number of open cases. She's a very proactive, very detail-oriented inspector with 45 cases, and you can see this before and after photo. It's a little hard to tell from the distance, but this is a great improvement. I know that this looks like a really clean, nice door here with this bright yellow, but the paint's all chipping here, and the landscapes were kind of deteriorated. What they did is they refreshed and changed the color over here, cleaned it up really nice on this one, and then they redid the landscape beds, and it's a much improved property. So moving on to cases. So cases open during the quarter by commission zone. Uh, Out of the 118, you can see the breakdown here. You have about 20 in zone 6, about 11 in zone 5, and this is just rental cases, keep in mind. You have 37 in zone 3, you got 26 in zone 2, and you got 17 in zone 1. Did I skip a zone in there? Oh, and you got 7 in zone 4. Sorry. Felt like a short one. Moving on to now, this slide just intended to show you the different types of inspections. The real important number on this slide is the total, because this is what the inspectors do every day. Like when you see it, when we come here each quarter, and every time we meet and we tell you, hey, the inspectors opened X amount of cases. That's not a true reflection of what they do in that quarter. What's a better reflection of what they do in that quarter is how many times they had to visit properties, how many times they had to meet at properties with people and look at the properties. And in the rental team, conducted 748 inspections during the last 3 months, essentially through January, February, and March. They conducted 740 inspections. And the percentage, this chart just shows you how those inspections break down. Some of them are listed as initial inspections for rental. Some of those are listed as re-inspections for rental. And then you'll see some that have a series of numbers in front of them. Just for clarity, any of the ones that have the series of numbers in front of them, those are just license inspections. So those are ones that they did as part of their licensing process. So those are when you see that kind of almost, it's about half of the pie. So half of their inspections related to people who were now trying to comply with the licensing aspect of it, or who were already complying with it. They were legally coming in and making application and going through the process legally like normal, law-abiding citizens, if there's such thing as normal. And for the quarter, Inspector Cole was the rental team sleuth of the quarter. He had the highest number of inspections with 317. It's a tremendous amount of inspections. We didn't have a good before and after photo from him because he was out for most of the. He was out for last week, and when we were trying to collect photos, um, but we did have a great photo from Danny. Danny's here. You want to wave? Give a wave, Danny. This is a vacant lot he was working on over off of Foot Court, and you can see the before. This is a vacant lot, folks, with this fence around it, with all this stuff on it, and this was several months of work. Him trying to get the owner to get this cleaned out, but he got it cleaned out and got it restored back to a vacant lot. As you can see on the right, it's a significant improvement. So great job. And last, we just talked. So the rental team had cases that went to hearing, and during that quarter, I think this is last. Oh, I lied. It's not last. Um, so during the quarter, the rental team had 123 cases that went to hearing, and we just broke it down by month. 40 of those occurred during January, 42 during February, and 41 during March. These are cases that each month the inspectors had to prepare for. They have a process that they have to go. There's a sheet they have to create that involves research of that case and the property. They have to pre-meet with us and the city attorney. Depending on the details of the case and how in depth the case is, they often get uh, scrutinized almost like in a mock trial, where we will play devil's advocate, or we will ask questions, or dig in to the case and try to make sure that they know the facts of the case and are able to articulate things in case they are asked certain questions, or in case they are um, um, you know uh, need to prepare a little better or do more research. Yes, ma'am. You tricked me. I wasn't supposed to take questions. Go ahead. Go ahead. Um, Mark, how? I mean, when they prep for hearings, it was about 2 days for all their cases, probably
Yeah,
worth of
for
time.
individual, yeah, because you've got to go ahead and research the cover sheet, prepare for the hearing with all the information. It'll include dates when they were noticed, uh, what the violation was, what time they were given to come into compliance, and where we are today when we're going before hearing. So it's all the facts of the case, making sure the ownership is the same, and um, from when they were originally cited, and that we went through all the legal steps to get to a hearing.
Yeah, that's the big part. But a lot of what we're doing when we do that preparation, that pre-meet, is double checking that due process was followed, because that's the one thing that always stays intact in a case that could be challenged or appealed years down the road, is due process. So we're always really trying to make sure that, hey, did we meet the due process requirements to that date so far? And so they lose about 2 days a month to that process, but that's for all their cases, not just like not 2 days per case. And then there's some time. Denzel was just saying it up here, that there's some time in between those 2 days that they lose, that they also have to go back out and revisit the properties before hearing, where they just do a reinspection between that pre-meet and hearing to make sure that they've either come into compliance or not come into compliance again, because they'll have to report that to the magistrate or the code board. Where are we at? Oh, we're right here. In this month or this quarter, Inspector Domingo was the rental team's prosecutor of the month. She had the highest number of cases at hearing with 53. 53 cases she had this quarter at hearing. Um, so we broke the cases down. Well, we looked at cases closed. And you guys probably already know this if you've been here before. We always look at how the cases close to see, you know, how people are responding to the notices really, and how our process is working to ensure that we gain compliance, because the goal is to gain compliance. We really don't want to seek out fines. We would prefer that the first time you get a letter from us that you go, oh, I have something wrong and let me go fix that, and you just go out and fix it. You call us and we come out and we check you off the list and we move on. But instead, usually what we get is an angry phone call, or a lecture about the Constitution, or something else related to that. And then we go through a friendly debate where we convince you and show you that you have to fix the thing. And then over a series of months, you finally do. And it's that's just, I'm just being honest. That's often the way it goes. So, but the good thing is, the reality and the good thing is that, right now, like for the quarter, you can see 57% of the cases they closed in compliance, which means that they complied without ever having to be appear in front of any board or any magistrate. So they fixed the issue without ever having to be brought any further along in the process. And then there's another additional 8% beyond that still complied before a fine had to be levied, but it was after they got a finding of noncompliance against them. Which all that means is that they stood before, well, if they appeared, they stood before a magistrate. Well, let me say this better. Their case was heard before a magistrate or code board, and the magistrate or code board determined that the facts supported that they were in noncompliance, and they were ordered to come into noncompliance by the next cutoff date, usually, or by a certain date. And they then came into compliance before that date, or somewhere after that, if that was amended or changed at some point along the way. But they ultimately came into compliance before a fine was imposed, but after they received that finding of noncompliance. Now, the interesting thing, and the reason why we started tracking it that way, is that if you get yourself into that situation, what happens is you now can be a repeat violator. So if we brought you before a magistrate and we get a finding of noncompliance against you, and you decide to commit the same violation 3 months later, we don't have to go through the whole process that we went on the front end, where we gave you a letter and said, hey, please fix this in 30 days or 10 days or whatever. We just send you a letter saying, hey, we see you're doing it again. You knew you weren't supposed to do this because the magistrate told you on this day you weren't supposed to be doing it. We're going to see you back at the magistrate at the next hearing. We'll send you a notice, or we'll send you a hearing notice. And that's what we call a repeat violation. And that's why we started breaking that out, because although the state has always allowed us to do that, because of the way we had it set up in the system, there wasn't a process that really worked well for the inspectors to kind of follow. So it was hard for them to find in the system what ones had the finding of noncompliances, what ones didn't. So we're trying to smooth that out, make it easier for them to identify the cases that have those, and that's why we started to change those statuses. So when they close out, when they search the cases, when they do their case history search on the property, they can see, oh, it has a finding of or if it has a finding of compliance after I'm sorry, it's closed finding, or after not it's closed compliance after a finding of noncompliance, and then they can go see, is that the same owner or not, and they go from there. But ultimately, the rental team closed 143 cases during this quarter. That's a great job. Um, and our last shout out is Inspector Cole for the rental team. He's the closer of the quarter. He closed 54 cases. That's the for the team during that time period. And we have another great picture from Inspector Garcia. It's a before and after photo of a lot. Um, you can see it was very overgrown, taking over the sidewalk areas, and he had them correct the issues, trim it up. and it's much improved. Moving on to the code enforcement team, and you can see that this is Mark Jones and his team. Um, they're looking very dapper. They all dressed up very nice. I think the picture looks great. So the code enforcement team themselves, they opened up 776 cases during the quarter. Uh, 253 of those were complaint driven. 523 of those were field generated, and that leaves them at 67% field generated, 33% complaint driven. So they're actually trending up. I believe this was going to happen. We talked about this last year. I think that we'll continue to see this probably trend up as the year goes on, or we may find a plateau here somewhere closer, right around this 70 mark. But I suspect we were always kind of right around the 60 mark last year. The law has changed now, and a lot of people aren't reporting stuff because of that. And or they're, I mean, we still get a lot of phone calls, but then they're reluctant to report once they know they have to leave their name and information. So, we I think you'll see the percentages adjust a little bit as we go along through the year. Inspector Wiggins is the code enforcement team's go-getter of the quarter. He had the highest number of field-generated cases with 104. 104 cases. He found himself an open. Tremendous amount. He's got a great before and after photo here. Um, it looks great. You can see they had a lot of vegetation growing out of the roof in this one, and a lot of dirt and grime above the garage. They painted the whole building, took some of the old light fixtures down. This one's it's off at North Beach, right? Yeah, off of North Beach there. Much improved. And if you take a ride down North Beach, I don't know if you've been down it lately, but you should start to see from from Fairview to Mason, it is really starting to improve. There's still a lot of problems over there, and we are working down there. But Inspector Wiggins has been working really hard and working with a lot of those property owners and Mark Jones as well. They've done a lot of getting those dealerships down there, or those mechanic shops, to clear out a lot of the car clutter that they've had down there that they shouldn't have been down there in the first place. They've been working with a lot of the businesses to get a lot of these properties painted and cleaned up. It's really starting to improve in that area. So here's a breakdown for us by subtype. We went ahead and threw in the slide both commercial and property type. The orange lines are commercial properties. The blue lines are residential properties, or bars, I should say, I guess. You can see in almost every category, the blue bar is going to be higher because that's typically, most of our zones are primarily residential zones, and our focus a lot of times is in the residential zones. Um, the uh, the let's see, the highest category, as usual, is exterior property. We talk about that all the time. There is an anomaly there where we have a high number of residential, um, no subtypes, which Mark is looking at because it should not be 129. Um, so we're investigating to see what happened there. We also think our life safety issue in residential property may be a little high, but that might be based on how we categorize it. Um, because once we categorize you as life safety, even if you fix it after the first notice, we don't change it because we always categorize it as whatever it was when it started. So, um, Inspector Bostwick was the General Code Enforcement Team's case pusher of the quarter, with the highest number of cases opened, 116. So he had 116 cases. And you can see he has a great before and after photo. I really hope you guys can see this well from here. He got this person to paint this whole house up here. They did a great job with it. It looks beautiful, big improvement. Um, he's doing a great job down in his zone too. Seen a lot of improvement down there as well in the residential neighborhoods. I'm sorry, I keep saying rental. The general code enforcement team um, did 2,312 inspections during the quarter. Yeah, yeah. And that's part of why we started adding this into the program, because it's a lot of work, and they do a lot of work. Um, and you can see that 70% of those are re-inspections. So they're doing a lot of babysitting of the same cases. Like, hey, we're back out here. You called us to say it's in compliance, but then we're back out here and it's not in compliance. Like, it's a lot of conversation about the person thinks they've fixed what was supposed to be fixed, but they have a different understanding of what compliance is. And then now that's a conversation about what really compliance is and trying to get them to achieve it. Or they've brought it into compliance by creating another violation, which sometimes happens as well. So then it's a conversation of okay, you did fix our violation by creating this other violation. So now you've got to correct this. Um, so a lot of work there. Uh, Great job for Inspector Bostwick. He's the General Code Enforcement Team scrutinizer of the quarter. He did 419 inspections. 419 inspections. And there's a great before and after photo right here of this seawall. One of the things that we did this quarter too. It was this quarter, right? Yeah. This quarter, Bostwick and Yates they took the beach and they divided it in half, and they drove the beach, and they uh, took assessment of every seawall that they could find along there that needed to be addressed. And they started cases all up and down the beach trying to address those seawalls and kind of hoping to try to get some action from property owners as we were moving towards the summer season here. So you can see, like, here's an example of somebody who did take that to heart, and they actually painted the wall and improved it. And so we're working on those stuff. And we do listen to you guys, and I know sometimes you guys have to tell me 4 or 5 times before we finally like throw it on the list. It's not because I'm ignoring you. It's just that sometimes we don't have enough people to go around. We only got 2 hands, you know. So we, but it all goes in the note. As Mark knows, because I hit him up with a notepad all the time. So hearings for the general code team. So they had 320 cases that went to hearing during this quarter. That's quite a bit. And you can see in January, they had 123 in January. January is quite a stressful month for this team because they were trying so hard to meet the benchmark number that we strive for opening of cases during January. But also there was this tremendous influx of cases that they had to prepare for hearing. And it was pretty overwhelming for them. We had to have a group conversation about it. So they're working very diligently, very hard, but prepping for 123 cases in 1 month is a lot, and that's a lot on the support team too, because they're having to run around the background scrambling to make sure things don't get messed up and moved around. And if you've been monitoring our court cases, you'll see we've had some, with the staff changes moving around and the volume of cases coming through there. Sometimes we've had a couple of, Scrivener errors that have occurred, and we've had to bump cases down to the next month. Luckily, we usually catch those ourselves and we fix them, which is how we like it to happen. We hate announcing those errors, but we'd rather announce them rather than just hide from them or run away from them and let somebody bring them up 3 years from now. So. Sarah Kirk is the General Code Enforcement Team's prosecutor of the month with 68. Not of the month, of the quarter, with 68 cases she had. She brought 68 cases to hearing. And she has a great before and after photo. This one really worked out nice here. They just cleaned up the landscape real good, got rid of the storage that was out there in front, got rid of the junk vehicle the storage was laid up on, cleaned the driveway up some. Looking at closed cases, you can see with the rental team, I did it again. General Code Enforcement Team, they closed 740 cases during the quarter. and 74% of them came into compliance. These guys love to get people into compliance, like especially like Inspector Wiggins. He makes it his mission. I think he doesn't like public speaking, honestly, and he makes it his mission. I'm joking. I've seen him talk in front of people numerous times. I don't think it's a problem, but he makes it his mission to try to convince people to fix things, and I think that's why you'll see that they work so hard to get people in compliance. But 74% came into compliance again without ever having to go to court, and then you have another 13% that came into compliance, um, although it after appearing in court and having a finding of non-compliance, but still before ever receiving a fine. So you had, what's that, a total of 87%, right? 87% brought into compliance, and you'll see back there only 15% of their cases ever even got a lien. No, 15 cases. I'm sorry, 2%. I said that wrong. Inspector Bostwick was the General Code Enforcement Team's closer of the quarter, with the highest number of closed cases, with 136 cases. 136 cases. Inspector Bostwick's highly motivated. He does a great job. They got a little competition going on in that cubicle area there between the three inspectors. They're all neck and neck with them, like 3 cases each on each of those categories. But he outpaced them on all 3 of those categories this month or this quarter. This is a great before and after photo, but this is not from Inspector Bostwick. It's actually from Inspector Butler. And you can see here that it's a great improvement. They of course mowed the lawn, but more importantly, they painted the house. Looks great. Big improvement for it. So this last part of the presentation is really just a summary of the whole team together. It does include some additional information. We'll just run through it real quick, but the team overall, they opened 895 cases. When you look at it in its entirety, it's 335 complaint driven, 560 field generated. That leaves in about 63% field generated as a team, and that's always going to come back down when you look at it as a team because, well, as of right now anyways, because the rental team is always going to pull them back down because of the way that work occurs. Of those 895, you can see the breakdown. Almost all of it is residential. I mean, not almost all of it. A large percentage of it is residential, 63% of it. Your next biggest piece of pie is commercial, and then residential comes in behind it. Looking at it by commission zone, the graph looks very similar, although the numbers are different, but it looks very similar than the last time we looked at it by commission zone. 895 cases is the total again, of course, but it breaks down with 142 in zone 6, 85 in zone 5, 21 in zone 4, 284 in zone 1. You got 284 in zone 3, 232 in zone 2, and 131 in zone 1. Total inspections for the team for all of neighborhood services was 3,060 inspections. Most of them, more than 50%, were re-inspections. And the rental team, like you've heard us talk about before, that's like the biggest problem for them is that they're 2, 3, 4 times out for re-inspections, people just not passing. And we've worked really hard to try to educate people ahead of time, and it's starting to improve. Giving them the information about what people typically fail on, pushing reminders out to them via text message ahead of time before their inspections, like, hey, make sure you have your batteries in your smoke detectors. So we're constantly working on those small improvements in the background. Overall, the team in its entirety prepped during the quarter prepped and presented for 441 cases at hearing during the quarter. And when you look at it, cases closed by status, again, 75% closed in compliance, and only 6% ended in a lien. That's important because that's what, a total of 54, which brings us to our next slide. You need to click it once, Mark. It'll do everything else for you. It'll do the rest. So the total number of cases that ended in a lien being imposed was 54 for the quarter. The total maximum dollar amount of liens imposed against non-responsive property owners during this quarter was $1,307,100. The total amount collected of outstanding liens during this quarter was $233,657.86. The total number of properties the legal department is pursuing foreclosure on during this quarter is 9, and the total number of new properties that the legal department began pre-foreclosure process on this quarter is 15. That's that foreclosure process is something that's very, I wouldn't say new. It's not something that's just like, oh, now we're foreclosing on, but we've really started to improve that over the last year. We are working with Denzel and I. We meet with the legal department like once a month, or is it once every 5 weeks? Something like that. Once a month, pretty much, and we go through all of the pre-foreclosures and foreclosure cases, and we talk about where they're at, how responsive they are, how they're working through the foreclosure process, and they're trying to get either a change of ownership or get people to become responsive to correcting their violations through that process. And there's been quite a few, like we had 2 this quarter that either paid their fine instead of being foreclosed on, or made their corrections. So, or actually, I'm sorry, with the second one actually just changed hands. It was a change of ownership through foreclosure sale. So it depends. If the change of hands is that it goes to a different owner, then yes, that's why we are involved in that process with them, like pretty much every step of the way, because they make it a notification to us immediately, and we immediately go cite the new owner, so they have a new notice. They know what to fix, and we usually give them like a 30-day, like, hey, go out. You got to take care of these things, please, and they go out and fix those things. Plus, we get paid. Most of the time, we get paid in that process for the lien that was owed on the property, because it was part of the change in ownership. It was that the foreclosure, that lien is part of the sale, you know. So that's usually how that goes. Now, if the change of ownership is that we then own it, then then no, like we don't recite ourselves. We go out and make the corrections. Or we might condemn a building or board a building or something like that and slate it for demolition. It just depends on the circumstances of the property. But there's some like we have one that we have a series of them over the next 3 months. Over the next 3 months, what do you think we have, like 4 or 5? Was it 4? Oh, was it 3? Maybe I overshot it. It might be 3. So we have 3 that we're like chomping at the bit that we're pretty sure we're going to own, and we're okay with that because they just need to come down to the ground. And that's okay, because they're just in that bad a condition, and they're they're that bad of a problem for the community. They're not just eyesore problems for the community. They're quality of life problems for the community as well. Police activity problems as well. Yeah. So moving on here. So currently, for us, we're working on a couple of different things. We've been working hard since probably around just before last summer on our vacant lot program. We're still working on improving the efficiency and the effectiveness of that. We're going to continue to work on that, especially coming up towards our growing season here. We are improving the functionality of our current database. We're kind of stuck in an outdated, antiquated database, but there's also some things that it hasn't been kind of maintained or And this isn't like an IT maintenance type of thing. It hasn't been maintained on our end, meaning we haven't told it what we need it to do. Kind of over the years, it hasn't changed with us. So we're working on updating violation information. We're working on updating forms and notices, and we're working on updating the process, that the way the system works, so that it matches more in line what our practice is or what our practice should be. Because sometimes we have to change our practice to match either the law, or we have to change our practice to match what the system is, because the system just is limited. So that's where we're at right now. We are in the process of buying a new software to replace that system, but we know that that implementation will take at least a year, because it's a system that integrates multiple departments within the city. So it's a quite a big implementation. And any improvements we make now on these things that we're talking about, violations, notices, forms, process, those are all things that establish our business process and help for our implementation into a new software anyways. So it's good that it's actually will improve and speed up our process of implementation for our department as we move into that new program. We're building an improved training program. We've discovered along the way that the way we onboard employees and the way that we routinely continue education throughout the process was probably not the most ideal. So we are what we sat everybody down kind of at the beginning of the year, and we had a conversation about just going back to the basics. And we're focused on quality of cases. We're focused on learning about just what we talked about when we looked at that first slide. Like, we know why we know the grass is a violation, but what IPMC are you writing up? Like, where do you find it? How do you look it up? How do you do this type of research? What words do you use? Those types of things. So those are things that just kind of got lost in translation when we were as we transitioned from staff member to staff member. So those are things that we're working on. We've had the rental program for a little over a year now. Well, we've had the rental inspection side of it for longer, of course, but the rental licensing aspect of it, we now take the payments, we do everything, and it's been quite overwhelming. It's a process that's constantly, we've found it in disarray, and we are correcting it and fixing it, and it's a long road, and we'll continue down that path. So that's why that bullet's on there. We want to make sure that it's fair, and that we're being proactive in finding rentals that are unlicensed, which is part of fairness, because one person shouldn't be allowed to rent a rental without a rental license, while another person has to pay a rental license to rent. And we've got to hold people accountable, but we need to hold ourselves accountable too, to make sure that we're doing our part in making sure that people are being held accountable. The future things that we're looking at, we really want to put an abatement program back in place. We talked about this for probably the last maybe 3 years now, 2 years. It's a critical second step to our vacant lot program, but I think a critical piece to that is that it's got to be an abatement program that allows us to roll those assessments over to the tax bill, because there's got to be that part of that component. Otherwise, it just really doesn't work. It turns us back into being a lawn service if we don't have that ability. Before, we were just mowing people's grass because it was cheaper to let us do it, and I really don't want to go back to that. What we're doing now, what Danny's doing now, is a little bit more time consuming. It's a little bit longer for us, and it's a little bit longer for the community. But the end result is, and we're starting to see it, is like this quarter, like 7 of those 9 that we're foreclosing on, those are vacant lots from Danny's program, and those are ones that when we take possession of those, which we likely will, that we can look at doing things like affordable housing or things like that. Those are things that we can look at doing something productive for the city, instead of them just sitting there being an eyesore or a blight to that residential community. And those are all conversations that are occurring, at the city level. So we really would like to build a commercial, or I would like to build a commercial property inspection team. Our folks just they're so focused. Their areas are so big. Their areas are so large, and they have so much demand from the residents to go work on different complaints and issues that are important to those residents, and they don't get to adequately inspect some of our commercial areas. And if you drive out to the west end of the city right now, some of the stuff that you think is some of the newest stuff built in the city, if you drove around it, you would think, if you really paid attention and looked at the signs and the conditions of them, the colors of the building, you would think, wow, how did we let this get so deteriorated and faded this fast? And that's what's happening. There's not enough of us to keep a watchful eye on that stuff, to keep that stuff refreshed. And quite honestly, those franchise businesses would paint that stuff if they just got a letter. It's just that we've got to be there to be able to remind them sometimes, and that's what I think a commercial property inspection program could be. You know, there's already a process where a BT inspector is inspecting most businesses each year, and I think we could tie in with that program, and we could do a maintenance inspection of that property at the same time, and really just give them, you know, this is the things you need to work on for this year. And yeah, sometimes that's going to mean it's a long list the first year, but the second year it's going to be a shorter list, and the year after that's going to be a shorter list, and it's just going to be a maintenance thing at that point. And that's the whole idea, is to keep you in good condition, and keep you at a quality condition, so that when people come into town, they feel good about where they're visiting, and you guys feel good about where you're living. So, you know, I really feel strongly that restaurants are a critical part of what needs to happen in this city going forward, especially on the beach side and the core. I think that's a critical part of increasing walkability, where you can convince tourists to come out of their hotels and walk west instead of east to the beach. And part of that is convincing restaurants, or having restaurants that have notoriety and stable, reliable reputations. And part of that starts with good inspections, making sure they're run well. And I think building a restaurant license inspection program is a critical part of that. And I think that program should be partnered with ABT, the health department, and us, and us meaning us, code enforcement, and the licensing department. And I think that if we did that, that could be done in a very friendly and customer based way, and it could be centered around making those businesses successful, so that they are our anchors in those areas, and they're what's driving, you know, walkability and tourism in those areas. Um, yeah, yeah. Uh, establish. So we want to establish a citywide residential assistance program for our homestead properties that have code violations. One of our biggest concerns for us is that there's some people that we get to the point where we have to fine them. They're homesteaded property, and we have no other choice. They don't even show up to court. We don't know what else to do with them. We're standing in front of the code board, and the process normally asks for a fine, so we just have to ask for a fine. But it's a homesteaded property. We know we're probably never going to be able to foreclose on it, never collect that fine. The only way it's ever going to show back up for us is if they sell the property all of a sudden. And quite honestly, we don't want the fine. We just want them to fix their roof, you know, and we don't think that that's the best approach on those properties. And what we would like to see probably is to see some fund created. And honestly, we've collected a lot of money in the last couple of years with funds, with code liens, and I think that those are funds that could be used for a program like that to try to assist. And I think if we looked at it from the aspect of folks that are homesteaded, who have financial or disability concerns, you know, where they can't do the work, or they don't have the finances to do the work. I think those are issues that we could use those funds to, or we should be looking at using those funds to try to support making those improvements, because it's not just about making that improvement for that person. It's about making that improvement for that neighborhood, because the neighbor probably called in the code complaint, and they don't want to look at the tarp on the roof that they've had to look at for 3 years, and the person living in it doesn't want to live in that condition, but they have no other choice because they don't have any money, and they have no other way to be able to fix it. And those are really the people I'm focused on, and they're a small percentage, I will tell you that. We most of the time when we get the fines, and I know, because when I looked at the fines today, when I was tallying it all up to put it in the presentation, almost all of them were $15,000 fines, and that means you're not a homesteaded property. There was very few $10,000 fines. So, you know, um, most it's a small percentage of these homesteaded properties, and a lot of the homesteaded properties, even if they get a fine, they're people that actually will fix it. They're just stubborn folks that once they get the fine, they fix it. They come in and ask for a lien. That's not what we're talking about here today. We're talking people who genuinely need help, and would have to go through some kind of qualification process. We've talked about for many years, talking about getting a short-term rental monitoring software. We really probably need to look at doing that. We are to the point where the only reason we haven't pursued this any sooner is because Cliff brings us so many cases each month that if we had a software program that brought us any more, we'd have to hire another magistrate. And I just don't think I could carve time in my schedule for another magistrate meeting in a month. And I just, they're tough cases in court, and I'll just leave it at that. I always get this question, so I'm going to head it off early. It's what can we do to help? And I always appreciate this question, but I just built it into the program. It's department needs. They're pretty basic for us. There's nothing I can call out to you guys that we need, like that you guys could like bring us, or help us with. But the things that we need are we need increased staffing. We are working on that. I've submitted requests. We're talking about that with the folks at the city. They're working to try to address those issues. I'm confident that we're working in a positive direction. That includes supervision, inspectors, and support staff. We need all of that because span of control has gotten too large for like Mark. He's supervising 10 people. That's much bigger than span of control really should be. Ideal span of control is around 6. And he honestly needs, and we need probably immediately 2 more general code inspectors. So he had 2 more to his team. 12 is certainly too many to be trying to manage for one person. So this is just, these are just things we need to start thinking about as a city going forward. And, there's a lot that's asked of our team between license enforcement, PD enforcement, redevelopment enforcement, solid waste enforcement. I'm missing something. Public works stuff. Yeah, all sorts of stuff. I got redevelopment in there. So all sorts of different stuff that we end up get called upon to assist with. And I'll be the first one to admit it. I take it as a compliment. We have a very well established enforcement program and process, and people rely on it and believe in it. And that's why they come to us for that. But if we're going to be able to do that, we need the staffing to be able to do that. And we're okay doing that, but we gotta. There's only so much that people can do with the 2 hands they have. So, that's probably the most critical thing we need. We are going to have to do a citation program for special events going forward. Our process for special events enforcement just doesn't work. Legally, it just doesn't function well with our legal process. So we'll need some citation equipment. That's a pretty small dollar item. I put it on there because it's something we're looking at needing. We need community support, which we have a lot of it usually, and you guys always show up to help us. And then we need our city leadership and commission support, and I think we have those last 2 things, and I appreciate that we do have those things. So I thank you guys for that, and I will put the closing slide up here, and which is just another before and after shot of Duva's place because I'm super proud of the way this turned out. And it just says neighborhood services still has a lot to do. The city of Daytona Beach is growing and evolving rapidly, and we must grow and evolve also to keep the pace. It's important that we as a community set the tone for the level of quality that we want to live, learn, and play in. At the end of the day, we get what we tolerate. So I'll leave it to you for questions. Yep. Ken. Yes, sir.
Hello? Yeah, there we
I'm
go.
sorry.
My
Commissioner
question
Strickland.
is, come on, man. my question is, what's the percentage of violations you find in CRA areas?
I've never looked at it percentage wise, and we don't actually zone it out that way. I can because we have a map made for that. When we did the city managers walk, I broke it down and mapped it out by CRA areas, so I can probably run that information for you. I just don't know it offhand.
Okay. Well, you're talking about helping folks paint houses and stuff. That was the original intent of TIF funds in a CRA when they first came up with them and established CRAs with the TIF fund component to it, but we haven't been doing a very good job of that. Hopefully we can institute some change and move it in that direction to help some of those people that can't afford to paint their house or fix their roof. I'm done.
Yeah, and the problem that we find is that it seems like when we run across somebody who are like, oh man, that person would probably qualify for a program that we have over at the city already. They either aren't geographically located where they can qualify for it, or there's some other kind of small little hurdle, and it's usually geographically located is the problem. And it's just kind of to the point where we're like, hey, we'd like something that's just a little more wide sweeping, that gives us the ability that, like, hey, the ones that are rentals or the ones that aren't homesteaded, we can track those to foreclosure, and either the foreclosure action is going to get them to correct or it's going to force a change of ownership. But the homesteaded ones, how about we track them over here to some kind of rehab or rehabilitation and see if that gets them where we need to get. And even if we get 30% of them, you know, it's a small number as it is, but if we get 30% of them that we can improve, that's 30% that's a few that we helped in the communities, that not just helps that person, helps the other people that neighbor that person.
So I have a statement and 2 questions, please. My first statement is, I've been listening to a lot of community meetings for a long time, and the number one complaint has always been code enforcement, and you guys over the years have started doing a phenomenal job. The change is remarkable and much appreciated, because it's really been, like I said, remarkable.
Thank you.
It's noticeable. So no, thank you guys. I have a question. 2 questions. Could you charge for re-inspections where you have to go out so many times? I know you get into is it punitive or compliance, but that was just a question. Second question is, would you ever consider having night and weekend code enforcement?
Oh, man. Okay. Thank you for the statement that you made at the beginning. So re-inspection. So on the rental side, we do charge for rental re-inspections after a period. It's after the second one. Yeah, 2 free. So that is by ordinance, and what we've done in the program is we've just stuck more rigidly to that, which they were doing pretty good about that when they transitioned over to me anyways. But we stick real rigid to that. It's like you either get it or you don't. On the other side, what we're looking at, or what we're trying to do, especially as we move into a new software program, is what we're hoping to do is be able to more adequately account for the inspector's time as far as it relates to the re-inspections, so that when we go into magistrate and code board, we can give a little bit more detailed information as to how much impact it had on us as staff, to get to maybe justify a fine or an administrative cost that would be accumulated in the fine or included in the fine. The nighttime and weekend code enforcement. Why do you want it? What kind of activity? We have an inspector on the weekend, but why else?
Well, I was just thinking of the thing that went on this weekend at Streamline. Like I don't know if that would have been helped by code. I know we have a lot of cars that get parked on that grass between the sidewalk and the street, like, that kind of stuff.
So so I would consider it if we get to the point of maybe having some kind of specialized enforcement role, or like something I played around with is maybe having like at some point a like quality of life enforcement team, or something like that. Uh, that would be something where maybe it would work. But right now we have such a demand for code enforcement and so much work for the inspectors to do that breaking somebody out into some of that secondary or auxiliary role, it takes them away from something that's so critical right now that that is we would lose so much to put them in that role, right? Because when they're working at night, for example, and maybe they'd be able to spot those people parking in the grass and be able to address those types of issues. Well, what they wouldn't be able to do is they would not be able to take follow-up pictures of, their house that they need to follow up in their zone for chip paint, because you can't take pictures in the middle of the night like that, and that's where we would lose it. The most of what they do and what they're responsible for is building maintenance things that they really need to be taking pictures during the day of. And that's where I have the kind of hang up for what these folks do. Now, to build out a secondary or a different role and do it, I think you could probably do it.
Okay,
To
that really
cross-train a
was my
part-time
question.
officer maybe to do it, I
Right.
could definitely get on board for something like that.
Yeah, that was kind of my question. I wasn't thinking that your code inspectors would go work 24/7 or 7 days a week. But like we do have all those people who park on vacant lots when they shouldn't, and so if you can consider it as a separate role,
Yeah.
that would be great.
Now,
Thank
what we do as well is we deploy during the events usually, depending on the events and the demand for the events or the type of events. Um, Typically, what we would deploy for was Bike Week and Biketoberfest mostly. This year will be the first year for a while that we will actually start deploying again for the races, because we have we keep getting a series of complaints on the west end of the city as well as for unlicensed parking lots and vendors and different things going on out there. So we'll be deploying for the races until we get that situation under control again. But for the most part, we just kind of try to read the events and see what's going on, and we deploy with them. And when we deploy for events like Bike Week, for example, they work until about midnight, and often Cliff's had to stay till 2 o'clock in the morning a couple of times because I've pulled him aside to deal with things like what you're talking about and said, hey, I know we've got an issue going on over here, and you're gonna need to stay late, and he's had to stay late. So we try to just kind of manage it that way, because those things, although they're important, they're usually kind of one-offs, and we know kind of when they're going to happen. We know when they're more likely to happen. Try to focus then. I will tell you, there's a series of complaints and issues that you guys tell me about that I know happen at night, and Mark and I know if we're going to be out during Bike Week, there's like a checklist that we go through. They're like, hey, all the things we got told about that we never get a chance to look at because we're not here at night, let's go look at them this week, because they're probably most certainly going on during Bike Week. And if they're going on then they're as good as whether they're going on all year long, and we address them then too. Yes, sir.
On your,
I got property for you too, by the way.
you got what?
I got somebody who needs your assistance.
Okay. My question is, I noticed on your sheets here about the different zones and how many, calls for service or whatever you want to call them. And I'm noticing Zone 3 is like off the charts compared to the other zones. Is that because more people are calling, or is it a different eye?
Well, I think it's because, I'm curious to know what happens next quarter. I think it's higher because we did our Main Street inspections during this quarter. So
Yeah.
our Main Street inspections were,
Well, your rentals and your regular calls for service in Zone 3
that's
are
true.
high compared to the other parts of the city.
That's
I
true.
was wondering, is it the inspector or is it?
Yeah, I really don't know yet, because we've been thinking about that. We're looking at the data this week also, and I was we're trying to like lock into why that's happening.
Yeah, because that's
Yeah.
quite a bit.
Yeah. I don't know if it's just because that zone has I mean, for rentals, it may just be because that just has more rental stock than the other zones. Like for instance, Zone 4 is going to have a lot less rental stock in it than Zone 3 probably. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Now Zone 2, they're going to have higher code stuff, not necessarily rental, but code stuff because they're going to have a higher volume of complaints. Because they're an active community and they call complaints in regularly, sometimes 16 at a time. Zone 2 Commissioner Strickland, can you tell her your boundaries? It's a little difficult. It was those numbers were interesting though, and it was really the first time we worked them into the presentation. Yeah. Well, I also think that there's a lot of activity of redevelopment in that area too, and there's a lot of we added. Remember, we added a whole inspector to like Zone 3, not to the whole Zone of 3, but remember, we carved that Main Street CRA out as its own zone. Was that 2 years ago? And you got John Baptiste in that area, so that in itself probably drives that volume in Zone 3 up pretty high. Yes, ma'am.
Once you give a non-homesteaded property a $15,000 lien, how long does the home owner have until you start foreclosure?
Well, it's not as simple as just saying we're gonna foreclose on that lien. I think I probably made that sound a little more simple than it was. Um, so they don't all qualify for foreclosure. Um, so sorry if I misled that
Well,
conversation.
I can give you why I'm asking. So
Yeah.
there's a property in our neighborhood that has a $15,000 lien on it. And I think it's because they haven't ever gotten a rental license. And so it just kind of looks like y'all have given up on them and just going to leave them alone with the $15,000 loan because they're still doing what they used to do.
Well, what I would recommend is to re-report that.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
don't. A lot of this stuff is about relentlessness. It's not
Mhm.
just about on the community's part, but also on our part. And with us, a lot of our priorities are always shifting. So we need you guys to kind of bring it back up to our
Oh, okay.
attention. And what happens is we are getting better at one of the part of the processes we started working back in last summer is we added into a part of the process of their investigation is to do property research. So like if you were to report that property, in theory, the inspector should be getting that complaint. And when they go through, they're looking at the prior cases. They should find that $15,000 lien, and they should go, "Hey, this is the same violation. Number one, it's a repeat violation now if it's the same violation. Number two, well, what shouldn't we be looking at this for foreclosure? They come to get with the supervisor. The supervisor should then be looking at it for foreclosure, or having legal look at it for foreclosure. And if it's not a lien that can be foreclosed on, then we would decide what to do at that point. There's other options, um, but they're not great. I can tell you. Um, you know, we have a couple of cases that we're attempting to have the city pursue injunctions against, because the liens are not foreclosed. They're just not great for foreclose on. One of the examples I can tell you is we're not going to foreclose on a property that has a lien in front of. I mean, a mortgage in front of it, because we're you know in most cases we're not going to foreclose on a property that has a lien in front of it. I mean, a mortgage in front of it. And so that's why, you know, you often see where a case is just sitting out there where it may not be foreclosed on. But there's other ways to come at the situation, and that's why I tell people just re-report it, re-engage it. If it's a community concern or problem for you, call in and speak to a supervisor about it if you need to, if you're not understanding why the issue's not being addressed, and they can explain to you either the complexity of why it's not being addressed or why you feel it's not being addressed. And sometimes that's like, I'll give you an example. When we send something for injunction, it's a pretty elaborate process. Like, we need, like, the couple that the legal department has that they're evaluating, they have 4 or 5, if not more, like, residents who we gave them phone numbers, and who can articulate significant community impact from the property. These are things that, like, where the whole yard's just full of junk and you've got people coming in and out scrapping all day long. You know, and those are ones where somebody's got to intercede, and they're not responsive even after a lien. And it's like, in that case, in the one I'm thinking of, it's a homesteaded property, so we can't foreclose on that one. So the only kind of choice we have in that case is to try to seek an injunction where the court tells them they've got to correct the issue. Um, so we're attempting to try to engage those things, but those things are really, as far as us as a city, we haven't done those in either quite a long time or never. These processes, we're kind of building them as we go, or rebuilding them, because I'm sure somewhere along the way we've done some of this stuff a long time ago, and we're learning as we go, and we're improving as we go, and sometimes it goes slower than it should. I'll be the first one to admit that. But the best thing you can do as a community is keep engaging us about it. Yeah. Oh, yeah, I will say that, um, there are some time frames that matter. The first one is like, if we get a lien on a property, it has to run, or it has to be, yeah, the imposition of the fine, and it has to be recorded for 90 days before we can ever foreclose. And then we can't recite certain things. Well, reciting becomes an issue if it's the same violation. We can't always recite.
Hi, my name is Monica. I would just want to say thank you for what you guys are doing. It seems like this small team covers like a lot of territory, and I think you're doing a really good job. It's very organized, and I met Danny here, and he's very proud of what he does, which is like really important for me. And I could see that everyone else on the team seems like they're happy and they take pride in what they do. I just wanted to ask about, like, do you have any suggestions of what could be done? Because I noticed that we do have a lot of vacant properties, and I guess the buildings on the parcels are deemed that they need to be taken down. Is there anything that could be done before they even get to that point, so we don't have all these vacant lots?
Um, well, ideally, so we're kind of digging ourselves out of a hole right now, right? So, ideally, that's why it's so important to have things like we talked about, maybe like a commercial building, or commercial property inspection team, things like that. That's forward thinking, right? So, had we been forward thinking 10, 15 years ago, and we were coming at those properties a little bit more rigidly with code enforcement, and code enforcement back then had the support of the community, and they were holding those property owners more accountable, they would have improved those properties and kept them in condition, most likely kept them in condition where they wouldn't be in a dilapidated state and now be having to be torn down, right? But we're not there. So churning them around now at this point, I mean, we can take code enforcement action against them, and the condemnation process is part of that code enforcement action. And yes, somebody could step in and turn that property around. It's always possible to work your way out of condemnation, but it's pretty difficult. It's pretty hard, and in many cases, Vern back there, he's a contractor. He can tell you it's much harder and much more expensive to retrofit a building, um, and rehab it than it usually is, at some point, I should say, than it is to just tear it down and rebuild a new building. A building reaches a point where it's like you can't save it. You gotta do a new building. Even if it's building the same structure again, sometimes you just gotta move on and build the same structure again. Um, I don't know if that's the best answer for you, but that's what I got. I will tell you that condemnations are, something that's run by the building department, which is a separate department from us. And you know, they're responsible for, you know, condemning those properties and kind of deciding which ones can be rehabbed and which ones can't be rehabbed, and working with those owners. They're very good at that. Yeah. And I have, after we're done here, I have some answers about the other stuff you asked about the last time at our meeting. Yep. Anybody else? All right. Thank you guys. Appreciate it.